And often the problems come back to the fact that the way Microsoft operates SQL licensing is based on our system. So they're making the software available to you. So you can typically, when you buy your first SQL Server license, you go to the portal, download your software. The license key is embedded in the activation software, and the install wizard, so it's embedded in there. You don't have a separate license key that you have to type in and all that sort of stuff. So that means that you can install it multiple times. Partly that's because you may need to reinstall or whatever, but it also means that you can go and just install this on 2, 3, 4, 5 different servers or virtual machines. That's really the first place. Typically, if you take a customer who's gone down this journey for the first time, they set up a SQL database, they start using it, they think this is really valuable, and somebody else says, oh, we can also do this on it, and it just spreads. So that's one area or that people get into trouble with, is that it's very easy to reinstall and to install multiple copies of SQL. Second thing is that we've gotten very complex in the hardware that we run databases on. And licensing just to this, and that change that I spoke about in 2012. So the big change Microsoft made in 2012 is they moved away from per processor licensing to per core licensing. And that really reflected what was happening in the hardware market. Intel and AMD and these companies were saying, well, we're not going to put 4 or 8 or 12 processors in a server, but we're going to put more cores on each processor to deliver more computing power. Microsoft and all their competitors reacted to that and changed the licensing model. So rather than licensing a processor, they now license cores. If you get a scenario where you're installing a server or installing SQL in a virtual machine, and that virtual machine has four virtual cores assigned, there's a licensing model for that. And then somebody comes along and says it's too slow, so they increase the number of cores assigned to that VM. Suddenly the licensing you have a licensing mismatch. That's another way. It's very, very simple to get out of whack. The other one is what Microsoft call licensing mobility rules. So licensing mobility is when you buy a specific type of license with a specific set of conditions. So it might be a server license, it might be a core license, it might have software assurance, or it might be a software subscription. All the different versions have all slightly different rules around what you can and can't do with them. So some allow you can move at will between one physical server and another. You can move at will between on-premise and cloud. Others are restricted on how you can move. So one restriction might be that you can only move it every 90 days, for example. So it can only move from one piece of hardware to another piece of hardware every 90 days. So there's all these type of rules around, depending on what you bought. People don't necessarily understand those rules. They think, when I bought my license, it should be okay on this particular piece of hardware. And if I need to move it over here for patching, then I can do that. That's not necessarily the case. So that's another area where people get into trouble. Another one is cloud, and particularly when you're in that transition between on-premise and cloud, and how do I license both? Can I run the same license on-premise and in the cloud as I'm doing the transition and testing and all of those things? And again, depends on what you've bought. And then the last piece is choosing what version of SQL you're on. So there's a core model, there's a server and cloud model. In the cloud world, there's the platform model. So it needs a bit of work to evaluate what's the best value for yourself. And then that's where you need somebody with some expertise to come in and look at what you're doing. Really, most of the time, it's just a mathematical model. What's the most cost effective? And then you go with that. But it does need some thought into it and some planning into what the best model is. So that's where you've got either the type of software you bought, the type of hardware you bought, conditions under what you bought the license, how you can use it, and that's where people get into trouble. So lots of ways, in other words.